Mort, thanks for being with us again. Good to see you. So just more on what you've heard in the last 24 hours and what we've been playing this morning from the White House. Again, Caroline Leavitt saying Secretary Hegseth...
Us, are you paying attention to us? And the more that Mike Johnson's problem is the more that he and the rest of the Republicans in the House act as mouthpieces for Donald Trump and not focus locally. All campaigns are won locally. Yeah, as long as he fails to understand that, I think we're going to continue to talk about more seats like this that are, if not up for grabs, they're at least strong contention for Democrats.
And it sends a message about who has momentum, especially as we now are within a year of the midterm election.
But it is a special election, and it does happen in a vacuum. We should keep that in mind.
Special elections are special.
That's right.
All right, Susan Del Percio, Basil Smykel, guys, as always, thanks. Thank you. Overseas this morning, meeting in Moscow. Ukraine peace talks move to Russia this hour. But does Putin want to end the war? And why is Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, involved? Plus, millions under storm watch for a wintry mix that could become a bomb cyclone. See if you're in the snow zone. You're watching MS Now. We're back in just a moment.
Safe like repair, safe like replace.
Sometimes things fall right into place, but other times they just fall.
No.
What was that?
But at least you can get it fixed now and pay later in 4 interest-free payments at SafeLight.com.
Awesome.
And SafeLight can come to you for free, anytime, anywhere, and do everything you need to get back on the road.
All set. Here you go.
Thank you.
Take care.
Get it fixed now and pay later at SafeLight.com.
Safe like repair, safe like replace.
In Moscow before the Putin meeting, and this comes on the heels of a weekend of meetings in Florida between Ukrainian and U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is notably absent today. I want to bring in MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner for the latest. Akayla, so much expected to happen behind closed doors today. Give us the clearest picture we have right now of where these negotiations stand.
Well, Anna, a controversial peace plan that originally emerged has since been revised. The original plan heavily favored Russia, but after discussions between U.S. and Ukrainian officials, we understand that it now stands at a 19-point peace plan. But that is the proposal that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be presenting to President Putin today. The exact details of those proposals, we just don't know at this point. But over the weekend, we heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that there was progress made over the weekend, but still very difficult issues to resolve. But President Putin has been placing really high pressure on Ukraine to agree to a deal to end this war. He originally had set a Thanksgiving deadline for them to agree to something, but now says there's no deadline and he simply wants the war to end. But there still remains to be questions about whether President Putin is genuine about ending this war, if he's simply buying time. But a key conversation happened just yesterday between Ukraine's Zelensky and Steve Witkoff, who's been at the center of controversy after a call was leaked between him and a senior Russian official, basically coaching them how to pitch that controversial peace plan to President Trump. But President Trump defending Witkoff and said the call only demonstrated standard negotiating tactics.
Kayla, thank you. I thought we maybe had some sound there. Appreciate. Please keep us posted as you get more information coming out of this meeting. And I want to bring in Michael Wise, who's the editor of The Insider, who has covered the Ukraine war extensively. Michael, we did get something of a picture of Witkoff's relationship with the Russians with that leaked transcript last week. Kayla mentioned. What will you be watching for coming out of this meeting today?
Well, I mean, that transcript was kind of shocking for many reasons. Number one, Witkoff was essentially coaching Yuri Ushakov, Putin's foreign policy advisor, on how Putin might flatter and persuade Donald Trump in a phone call that, as we know, not only scuttled Trump's possible decision to provide Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine, but led to this sort of frenetic news cycle in which we were going to have a summit in Budapest, which was then.
Oh, sorry, Michael, you're cutting out, but I think we have you back. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I don't know when I cut out, so I'll just say Marco Rubio had liaised with Sergei Lavrov about a version of this 28-point plan and came back and told the president Russia still seeks a maximalist position on Ukraine. In other words, they have no intention of ceding any ground, diplomatically or otherwise. There's no point in having a summit in Budapest to try and hash this out. What ended up happening, as we now know, Kirill Dmitriev, who's the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, did an end run around Rubio and around Lavrov, I must say. The Kremlin has many towers, is the old saying. It's not a monolith, as we might be accustomed to thinking, to try and present his own version of this plan via Witkoff and Jared Kushner. But you see here, Anna, I think, desperation on the part of certain actors in the White House, particularly Witkoff and Kushner, riding high on their own supply, I suppose, because of the Gaza ceasefire that they negotiated, but also J.D. Vance. The Atlantic and other outlets have reported Vance was desperate to push this thing through to provide Donald Trump with a win before the midterm elections next year. And Vance, as we know, doesn't really care that much for Ukraine and isn't interested in Ukrainian sovereignty and independence, much less security guarantees. He just wants to deal at all costs. So what we're seeing here, I think...
Michael, let me just engage here, because right now, let's just talk about the players in the room today. Russian state media is saying this is going to be a meeting between only Putin, Witkoff, and Kushner, and a translator, but no one else. How unusual is that? And why Kushner? Where does he come into play here? He wasn't involved until now.
Danger, Will Robinson.
Well, the tech gremlin's got us.
Are from the Russian government side, so that's also an interesting tell.
We are having
Kushner's
so many issues with your audio. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
I think we better cut this one short and try again another time. Michael Weiss, you're always such a wealth of information and an expert on all things related to the Russian-Ukraine war. It's great to have you with us, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much. Up next, we have new updates from day 2 of the Luigi Mangione evidentiary hearing, and protests in New Orleans as the Big Easy prepares for a big influx of immigration action.
The recipe for a long, healthy life? It starts with gently cooking our food to give your dog the nutrients they need without the ultra-processing. Get 50% off your first box only at thefarmersdog.com.
Our right to reproductive health care is being stolen from us.
Into this conversation, you have a new piece in Zateo headlined, "He Killed for the CIA in Afghanistan. Trump blames Afghan culture instead of Langley's." Can you elaborate?
Yes, your guests have spoken very eloquently about the betrayal and the dishonor that the collective guilt of Afghan refugees ascribed by the Trump administration for this horrific murder is having. What we're focusing on less is that the person who committed allegedly these crimes, Lachenwall, had a gun put in his hand when he was a child by the CIA. Apparently, when he was 14 or 15, he was brought into the Zero Unit number 3 around Kandahar. Apparently, his brother told the New York Times. Apparently, his brother, the New York Times reported, was a deputy commander of this unit. This unit was a death squad. The United States made this person into a child soldier, and now is experiencing what I think is one of the most horrifically bright-line cases of imperial blowback that we've seen throughout the war on terror. If the United States wants to find out whose culture is responsible for this horrific crime, it needs to start by knocking on doors at Langley, and as well the Afghans who ran the U.S.-backed Afghan intelligence service known as the NDS. It was this culture of violence, of impunity, of murder for political reasons that had a specific role, we'll find out more at trial, of shaping Lachenwall and his circumstances. To blame the Afghans who came here as refugees, desperate, overwhelmingly, as your guest said, who worked with the United States, who served the U.S. war effort, is perverse, and it is ultimately a cover for allowing the U.S. to continue to create death squads, to outsource its most murderous and its most despicable wartime actions to locals who then it can blame them for.
I was thinking about Timothy McVeigh, who was on the highway of death in Iraq. He comes back from there. He blows up the Oklahoma City building. He kills, something like 169 people. No one said then that all white Christian men should be imprisoned, let alone deported. But your thoughts on those kind of comparisons?
I think what we are really seeing is the horrific consequences of a violent, exploitative, and extractive U.S. foreign policy once again, not for the first time, but once again, coming home. If the United States actually cherishes the lives of these West Virginia National Guardsmen who should not have been in D.C. in the first place to backstop ICE, that's its own issue. But if the United States values their lives and values the lives of other service members and other Americans, then it has an obligation to, in the first instance, stop creating these death squads, to stop creating the conditions that are warping the people who serve in them to the point where they would commit horrific murders like these. That's a cherishing of human life that we never see from the United States in its foreign policy missions around the world.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more. New piece in Zateo headlined, "He killed for the CIA in Afghanistan. Trump blames Afghan culture instead of Langley's." Can you elaborate?
Yes, your guests have spoken very eloquently about the betrayal and the dishonor that the collective guilt of Afghan refugees ascribed by the Trump administration for this horrific murder is having. What we're focusing on less is that the person who committed, allegedly, these crimes, Lackenwall, had a gun put in his hand when he was a child by the CIA. Apparently, when he was 14 or 15, he was brought into the Zero Unit number 3 around Kandahar. Apparently, his brother told the New York Times, apparently his brother, the New York Times reported, was a deputy commander of this unit. This unit was a death squad. The United States made this person into a child soldier and now is experiencing what I think is one of the most horrifically bright-line cases of imperial blowback that we've seen throughout the war on terror. If the United States wants to find out whose culture is responsible for this horrific crime, it needs to start by knocking on doors at Langley, and as well the Afghans who ran the U.S.-backed Afghan intelligence service known as the NDS. It was this culture of violence, of impunity, of murder for political reasons that had a specific role, we'll find out more at trial, of shaping Lackenwall and his circumstances. To blame the Afghans who came here as refugees, desperate, overwhelmingly, as your guest said, who worked with the United States, who served the U.S. war effort, is perverse, and it is ultimately a cover for allowing the U.S. to continue to create death squads, to outsource its most murderous and its most despicable wartime actions to locals who then it can blame them for.
I was thinking about Timothy McVeigh, who was on the highway of death in Iraq. He comes back from there. He blows up the Oklahoma City building. He kills, something like 169 people. No one said then that all white Christian men should be imprisoned, let alone deported. But your thoughts on those kind of comparisons?
I think what we are really seeing is the horrific consequences of a violent, exploitative, and extractive U.S. foreign policy once again, not for the first time, but once again, coming home. If the United States actually cherishes the lives of these West Virginia National Guardsmen who should not have been in D.C. in the first place to backstop ICE, that's its own issue. But if the United States values their lives and values the lives of other service members and other Americans, then it has an obligation to, in the first instance, stop creating these death squads, to stop creating the conditions that are warping the people who serve in them to the point where they would commit horrific murders like these. That's a cherishing of human life that we never see from the United States in its foreign policy missions around the world.
On the House Oversight Committee, she's a busy lady. I want to hear about the stories that you heard when you were on the ground in Los Angeles for this hearing that we just teased, about the stories that immigrants, I imagine some who are not U.S. citizens and some who actually might be U.S. citizens, and what they had to tell you guys.
Yeah, so first of all, we heard the story of a U.S. citizen who was on her way to work, and as she tried to tell them, listen, I'm a U.S. citizen, they would not listen, and she was taken into custody. We also heard about just the conditions, the horrific conditions that human beings are being kept in, the unsanitary conditions. But here's the reality. We went to L.A. I've been to Chicago to hear stories about, how much force is being used when people are being detained. But, I can go right home, and I know the stories of my constituents. I know about a young lady who's only 21 years old and had consistently showed up to her appointments, and she was nabbed at one of those appointments. Her family said, make sure she's got her diabetic medication. They tried to give it to them. They would not take it. Ultimately, 5 days later, when they didn't give her medication, they had to take her to a hospital. They then put her back into custody, and ultimately there were issues with literally, I won't get so graphic, but involving urine and some other things.
Feel free to get graphic.
Well, I mean, there were allegations that because they were actually depriving them of water, that they literally were having to drink their own urine. This can't be America. But obviously, in Trump's America, this is exactly what he wants. And the idea that one person can get out of line and commit such a horrific crime as shooting two National Guardsmen that never, ever asked to be here. In fact, we know the young lady that lost her life, specifically, we're saying that this is a waste of time, but now you want to go against every single immigrant. That doesn't make sense. And it's frankly not who we are, because if that's the case, let's talk about the white supremacists and how many of them need to be kicked out of this country, because I can guarantee you I can track down more crimes that they've committed, because overall immigrants have a lower crime committal rate than white supremacists. But we don't want to talk about that in this country.
I mean, the FBI has for years said that homegrown terrorism is actually a much bigger issue than anything from any other country. One of the things that we keep hearing the president say is that he is going to denaturalize people. There should be people denaturalized, people who don't adhere to Western civilization values, whatever that means. I'm curious what you think about that, because one, it's not something he can do, right? He can't go around waving a wand and denaturalize people. There's a process. He's not supposed to.
Okay.
There's a legal process to that.
Yeah.
But what do you think is actually behind that? Because he probably knows that he can't do it, but what do you think he's trying to signal?
I think he is trying to do what he's always done, which is instill fear. He wants people to go into the shadows. He wants people to hide out. The way that they're doing right now, people are not sending their kids to school. They're not showing up to work. He is wanting people to be terrified, and he only wants his kind of people on the streets. He wants everyone else to kind of languish in the shadows. But we can start with the fact that he's married a couple of immigrants himself, and we can start there if we about to start denaturalizing. I'm just saying.
Congresswoman, you mentioned children not going to school as a result of the fear that's being instilled by the president. But something that we should be talking more about, and that's children who are being caught up in all of this. ProPublica had a story out on Monday. ICE sent 600 immigrant kids to detention in federal shelters this year. It's a new record. In a majority of the cases we examined, kids ended up in shelters in ways government officials say they never would have in the past, after routine immigration court hearings or appointments, or because they were at a home or a business when immigration authorities showed up to arrest someone else. Once children are in shelters, the government is making it harder and harder for relatives or other adults who act as sponsors to get them back. The average length of stay has grown to nearly 6 months, up from 1 month during the presidency of Joe Biden, public data shows.
Yeah. This is the pro-life party. I just want to be clear. This is the party that says that, you know, they care so much about life until life actually shows up at their front door. And this is also the party that supposedly is about Christianity. And I just imagine what they would have done to a little baby Jesus, but that's a whole other issue. You know, it is really so heartbreaking. We know that under the prior Trump administration, it was the children in cages. So for me, expecting them to do better by children was not one of the things that was on my bingo card. I never expected them to do better. I expected them to do worse. And frankly, that is what they have done with this entire administration, is they have made everything worse. Like, it was bad the first time, so bad that he got kicked out of office. And then, unfortunately, America got amnesia, and somehow he ended up back in office. And now he is literally terrorizing everyone, from children that are born in this country to children that aren't born in this country to adults. It is really sickening. And if we are really going to get back to where we are truly great in this country, it is going to take really looking at your neighbors and seeing their humanity. He was able to dehumanize people during the election, whether it was trans folk or whether it was the immigrant. He dehumanized. And if you study anything about the Nazis, that is where it all starts, is the dehumanization. And none of us should be sitting by, even if we're not trans, even if we're not an immigrant. You have to understand that the dehumanization will come in for black folk. It will come in for women. It will come in for everyone. And that is why we unfortunately got here. But if we recognize where we went wrong, hopefully we can get back on track and recognize that our strength lies in our unity, because there's so many more of us than there are of them, this hateful, venomous regime that we're living under right now.
Congresswoman, you sound like somebody.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
In my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss if I'm at 40%.
Some sick people, radical left lunatics, and I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
You know, if you had one day, like one real rough, nasty day, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately. He's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi.
What do we think of when we think of America? Hot dogs? Rodeos? Police brutality? Whatever you think about the ironically named land of the free, you're going to be forced, probably at gunpoint. I feel comfortable drawing a direct line here for reasons of, well, history, and also because animals and babies there too. Comes from this famous anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that the German army was defeated not by the enemies it was obviously easily winning against on the battlefield, but by the enemies from within. The socialists, the Marxists, the radical left, as Trump would say. The officers peddling the conspiracy theory that swept the Third Reich into power said the same things.
I know many of them. It's just this amorphous group of people. But they're smart and they're vicious.
The enemy within. A conspiracy, in their minds, of Judeo-Bolshevism.
And we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy.
In their minds, socialism was part of a Jewish plot against the German state.
No, they've done very bad things to this country. They are indeed the enemy from within. But this is who we're fighting.
During the Second World War II, as the Greater War turned against the Germans, the Fuhrer once again took the failure out on his scapegoats, for those he hated so much that he had made that hatred the foundation for his entire project. British intelligence, on the eve of the was tracking Hitler's growing preoccupation with the enemy within, by which of course he meant the Jewish people. The document was found among a collection of papers belonging to the family of Mark Abrams, a social scientist who worked with BBC's Overseas Propaganda Analysis Unit and the Psychological Warfare Branch during World War II. Written just as the war was starting to turn against Hitler, it shows that British analysts had noticed signs of developing paranoia in his speechmaking and, chillingly, a growing preoccupation with what he called the Jewish poison. At the time that it was written, the tide had started to turn against Germany, Anthony said. In response, Hitler began to turn his attentions to the German home front. This document shows that British intelligence sensed this happening. McCarthy recognized that, faced with external failure, the Nazi leader was focusing on a perceived enemy within instead, namely the Jews. Given that we now know the fight was commencing, this makes for poignant reading. And you don't have to go much further from there to connect the horrors of the Third Reich to the promises and the lies of the Trump campaign. The lies he repeated during the presidential debate about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs, painting them as monsters, was compared by multiple outlets to the blood libel, the age-old conspiracy theory that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children to make matzah, the textbook anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and on its face, a ludicrous smear. So too are these lies about Haitians. Although I don't quite feel comfortable drawing a direct line here for reasons of, well, history, and also because animals and babies, they're two different things. The spirit, however, is there, and the smears work in the same way. People who are already primed to hate the target of the smear will use it to justify and intensify their pre-existing disgust, and will push them from irritation and harsh words closer to outright violence. Those who recognize it rightly as a falsehood dismiss it as ridiculous, because it is. But it is important that we recognize that it is as dangerous as it is false. This is an important tool in radicalizing the people that Trump needs to get his violent work done.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You don't need to be a historian to see the obvious connections between accusing Jews of eating children and Haitians of eating pets. And since the Haitian Revolution, Americans have often treated Haitians as the embodiment of the terrifying racial other, in the same way that Europeans displaced their fears and resentments onto Jews. Marianne Williamson helpfully made the subtext the text in a tweet saying that Democrats dismiss Trump's lies at their peril because Haitian voodoo is in fact real. The same is true with another Vance lie about Springfield, that Haitians are responsible for a surge in communicable diseases, including HIV/AIDS. I say it's a lie because there's no public evidence supporting it, and authorities on the ground contradict it. Once again, however, this lie has a deeply troubling history. Immigrants have long been falsely accused of bringing disease to keep them out. Nazis did the same to Jews. Specifically, Nazi propaganda would regularly accuse Jews of spreading typhus, a lice-borne disease that killed millions in early 20th century Europe. Much like HIV, typhus was a stigmatized ailment, stereotypically associated with the moral defectiveness or dirtiness of the afflicted. Nazi doctors wrote pseudoscientific papers accusing Jews of spreading typhus due to our alleged low cultural level and uncleanliness, part of the justification for cramming Jews into Polish ghettos, before shipping my ancestors and the co-religionists
Gaza's population.
That Trump has promised on multiple occasions to carry out the biggest mass deportation of migrants in the history of the United States. How do you think that's going to go? What happens when people don't go? Because this also was the Third Reich's initial plan for their victims. People these days seem to think that a fascist starts by doing what the Third Reich was doing when it was overthrown. But they're wrong. Deportation was the original plan. Then there were too many victims that were put into camps, and then, well, you know the next part. And it's not as if Trump isn't aware of this. On April the 20th, Trump was asked whether he would build new detention camps as part of this mass deportation plan. And his response was, I would not rule out anything, but there wouldn't be that much need for them.
This massive migrant detention camp, built in just 8 days, has an unusual deterrent to prevent any escapes.
Don't run in a straight line. Run like this.
He calls it Alligator Alcatraz.
It's meant more as a joke, but the more I thought of it, the more I liked it.
With gators clearly visible outside, NBC News getting a first look inside.
Because this also was the Third Reich's initial plan for their victims. People these days seem to think that a fascist starts by doing what the Third Reich was doing when it was overthrown. But they're wrong. Deportation was the original plan. Then there were too many victims that were put into camps, and then, well, you know the next part. And it's not as if Trump isn't aware of this.
To Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The White House is defending the Pentagon over allegations it carried out war crimes during an attack on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. Last week, The Washington Post reported U.S. forces sank a vessel with 11 people aboard during a September 2nd strike, then launched a second strike to kill 2 survivors as they clung to the smoldering wreckage of their boat. On Monday, the White House confirmed the second strike occurred, but claimed the order to kill the survivors of the initial attack came not from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, as the Washington Post reported, but from Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, who at the time was the head of JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. This is White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt.
With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
On Monday evening, Pentagon Secretary Hegseth wrote on social media, quote, "Let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support," unquote. His comments came after Democrats and some Republican lawmakers said Hegseth may have committed war crimes if he ordered U.S. forces to attack survivors. We'll have more about war crimes on the high seas after headlines. We'll speak with Georgetown law professor David Cole. Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinian teenagers in separate incidents Monday as they carried out raids across the occupied West Bank. In Hebron, soldiers fatally shot 17-year-old Mohamed Tarek Mohammed al-Zugair, whom they accused of carrying out a car-ramming attack that injured an Israeli soldier. Elsewhere, 18-year-old Mohammed Raslan Mahmoud Asmar was shot during a raid on his village northwest of Ramallah. Witnesses say the teen was left to bleed out as Israeli forces barred Red Crescent medics from approaching. The soldiers then seized his lifeless body. Last week, the United Nations reported more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli settlers and soldiers in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem since October 7, 2023. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces killed at least 1 person in the Burej refugee camp Monday in the latest violation of the ceasefire deal that took effect on October 10th. In another violation of the truce, Palestinians report Israeli forces continue to cross the so-called yellow line on a near-daily basis. This week, a coalition of 12 Israeli human rights groups concluded in a new report that 2025 has already become the deadliest and most destructive year for Palestinians since 1967. Pope Leo is in Lebanon, the nation with the highest proportion of Christians in the Middle East, as part of his first foreign trip as pontiff. Earlier today, he held Mass at the site of the 2020 Beirut port explosion, which killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. Pope Leo also met with the families of those killed in the explosion.
In an age when coexistence can seem like a distant dream, the people of Lebanon, while embracing different religions, stand as a powerful reminder that fear, distrust, and prejudice do not have the final word, and that unity, reconciliation, and peace are possible.
Before arriving in Lebanon, Pope Leo over the weekend said that a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict must include a Palestinian state. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked Israeli President Isaac Herzog to grant him a pardon from corruption charges and to bring an end to his trial. Netanyahu has been charged with fraud and accepting bribes in 3 separate cases accusing him of exchanging political favors with wealthy supporters. On Monday, protesters gathered outside the Tel Aviv courthouse where Netanyahu's trial is being held.
There's no such thing as being exonerated from files from being a criminal. And he is a criminal, and he should be standing on trial just like every other citizen in Israel.
Netanyahu is the injured thousands. Pope Leo also met with the families of those killed in the explosion.
In an age when coexistence can seem like a distant dream, the people of Lebanon, while embracing different religions, stand as a powerful reminder that fear, distrust, and prejudice do not have the final word, and that unity, reconciliation, and peace are possible.
Before arriving in Lebanon, Pope Leo over the weekend said that a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict must include a Palestinian state. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked Israeli President Isaac Herzog to grant him a pardon from corruption charges and to bring an end to his trial. Netanyahu has been charged with fraud and accepting bribes in 3 separate cases accusing him of exchanging political favors with wealthy supporters. On Monday, protesters gathered outside the Tel Aviv courthouse where Netanyahu's trial is being held.
There's no such thing as being exonerated from files from being a criminal. And he is a criminal, and he should be standing on trial just like every other citizen in Israel.
Netanyahu is the only sitting prime minister in Israeli history to stand trial. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law Jared Kushner are set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow today. Witkoff and Kushner are expected to offer Putin a U.S.-backed peace proposal that was revised during negotiations between American and Ukrainian officials in Miami over the weekend. This follows reporting from the Wall Street Journal on Witkoff's October meeting with Kirill Dmitriev, head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund and Putin's hand-picked negotiator. Dmitriev reportedly offered a plan for U.S. companies to tap nearly $300 billion of Russian central bank assets frozen in Europe. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met French President Emmanuel Macron Monday and is in Ireland today for meetings. Amidst the diplomatic activity, Russia launched a missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, killing 4 people and injuring 40. Meanwhile, Putin is claiming victory after Russian forces captured the Ukrainian town of Pokrovsk in the eastern Donbas region after fierce fighting for over a year. Pokrovsk was once a strategic logistics hub for the Ukrainian army. President Trump vowed there will be, quote, hell to pay in Honduras if election officials tampered with the results of Sunday's presidential elections after threatening to cut off U.S. aid to Honduras if his favored candidate doesn't win. As of Tuesday morning, just over half the ballots have been counted, and it's not clear when a final result will be announced. Trump-backed candidate Nasser Yasfouda of the right-wing National Party held a razor-thin lead of just 515 votes over his rival, Salvador Nasrallah. This comes as President Trump pledged to pardon Honduras's former president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's currently serving a 45-year jail term in the U.S. for cocaine trafficking. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One on Sunday, President Trump was asked why he would pardon a convicted drug trafficker.
You've made so clear how you want to keep drugs out of the U.S. Right. Can you explain more about why you would pardon a notorious drug trafficker?
Well, I don't know who you're talking about. Which
Juan Orlando Hernandez.
Well, I was told, I was asked by Honduras, many of the people of Honduras, they said it was a Biden setup.
In Haiti, heavily armed gangs killed nearly a dozen people as they set fire to homes and forced hundreds of survivors to flee over the weekend. The attack took place in Haiti's central region. Half the area is now under gang control. One of Haiti's police unions called it, quote, one of the greatest security failures in modern Haitian history, unquote. This comes as the Trump administration announced it's ending temporary protected status, TPS, for 340,000 Haitians living in the U.S. by February 3rd. In Indiana, Republican lawmakers have unveiled a new voting map that's designed to hand their party all 9 of Indiana's seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The new map would divide districts in Indianapolis and the Chicago suburbs that have consistently voted for Democrats and are home to Indiana's largest concentrations of non-white voters. Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the smoldering wreckage of their boat. On Monday, the White House confirmed the second strike occurred, but claimed the order to kill the survivors of the initial attack came not from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, as the Washington Post reported, but from Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, who at the time was the head of JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. This is White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt.
With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
On Monday evening, Pentagon Secretary Hegseth wrote on social media, quote, Let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support, unquote. His comments came after Democrats and some Republican lawmakers said Hegseth may have committed war crimes if he ordered U.S. forces to attack survivors. We'll have more about war crimes on the high seas after headlines. We'll speak with Georgetown law professor David Cole. Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinian teenagers in separate incidents Monday as they carried out raids across the occupied West Bank. In Hebron, soldiers fatally shot 17-year-old Mohamed Tarek Mohammed al-Zugair, whom they accused of carrying out a car-ramming attack that injured an Israeli soldier. Elsewhere, 18-year-old Mohammed Raslan Mahmoud Asmar was shot during a raid on his village northwest of Ramallah. Witnesses say the teen was left to bleed out as Israeli forces barred Red Crescent medics from approaching. The soldiers then seized his lifeless body. Last week, the United Nations reported more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli settlers and soldiers in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem since October 7, 2023. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces killed at least 1 person in the Burej refugee camp Monday in the latest violation of the ceasefire deal that took effect on October 10th. In another violation of the truce, Palestinians report Israeli forces continue to cross the so-called yellow line on a near-daily basis. This week, a coalition of 12 Israeli human rights groups concluded in a new report that 2025 has already become the deadliest and most destructive year for Palestinians since 1967. Pope Leo is in Lebanon, the nation with the highest proportion of Israel. President Trump's former personal attorney, Alina Habba, is serving unlawfully as U.S. Attorney for New Jersey. In their unanimous ruling Monday, 3 judges with the U.S. Third Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the Trump administration broke the law as it maneuvered to keep Habba installed as the top federal prosecutor in New Jersey after her 120-day interim appointment expired in July. This comes just days after a federal judge ruled that acting U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan, another former Trump personal lawyer with no experience prosecuting criminal cases, was also installed to her position unlawfully. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said 3 of his offices in New York were targeted with emailed bomb threats alleging the 2020 election was rigged, with the subject line MAGA. This comes as Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly announced he and his wife Gabby Giffords have been receiving more death threats since President Trump called for his execution after Senator Kelly and other Democratic lawmakers urged U.S. service members to refuse illegal orders.
We take these threats very seriously, and I take, the threats from this president seriously. How many times in our country's history have you heard a president of the United States say that members of the Senate and the House should be hanged and executed? I can't think of one.
We'll have more on this story after headlines. And President Trump has commuted the 7-year prison sentence of private equity executive David Gentile, who defrauded over 10,000 investors of around $1.6 billion. Gentile was convicted of securities and wire fraud last year and was just days into serving his prison sentence. According to prosecutors, his victims were described as small business owners, farmers, veterans, teachers, and nurses. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Welcome to The Daily Show. My name is Jon Stewart. Great show for you tonight. Later on, we're going to be joined by author Elizabeth Kolbert. We will be discussing the environment. Do we still need one?
Back-to-back gestures that people are saying mimicked a Nazi salute. Elon Musk gave these back-to-back gestures that people are saying mimicked a Nazi salute. You see it there. Elon Musk has not directly addressed this, but he has appeared to edit out that gesture from the video that he posted on X, the platform he, of course, owns. Help us understand what transpired.
Thank you.
Elon Musk gave these back-to-back gestures that people are saying mimicked a Nazi salute. You see it there. Elon Musk has not directly addressed this, but he has appeared to edit out that gesture from the video that he posted on X, the platform he, of course, owns. Help us understand what transpired.
Thank you.
Oh, careful. Careful with that salute.
It wasn't even like a subtle, like a wave, like one of these, like a...
It's okay, it's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
That's what a Nazi would say.
We don't want Italy as a culture to disappear. We don't want France as a culture to disappear. I think we have to have maintain the sort of reasonable cultural identity of the various countries. Or they simply will not be those countries.
Aber der ist wahrscheinlich für Sie auch Nazi, hm? Nazis, 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 lauter Nazi.
USA, 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 USA. Ah! Yes.
No, dog. No, this is the Charlie Chaplin mustache.
Hey, so what the fuck was that? I mean, we all know what that actually was, but there are a lot of people online, from Elon Musk simps to professional headline writers for major newspapers, insisting that it was something else entirely. A mysterious gesture, or just what autistic people do, which I can't even begin to pass the ableism of saying that autistic people are just biologically predisposed to seek hireling. As if we could have just stopped World War II if we just replaced all of the Germans' machine guns with fidget spinners or something.
Sorry, I was stimming.
Besides the people just flat out in denial because they've decided that don't believe the evidence of your own eyes and ears was in fact not an incredibly on-the-nose line from George Orwell's 1984, but actually just words to live by, inspiration, hashtag just girly things. And of course, the editors at the New York Times, the BBC, and the Daily Mail, who were terrified of upsetting the richest man on earth, and are filled to the brim with conservative bootlickers whose one job is to make sure that they don't upset too many millionaires by reporting too many inconvenient facts. On top of all those people, you have the people who think they found the world's most ill-timed gotcha. It's not a Sieg Heil, you see. It's a Roman salute.
Well, that's all right then.
Gee, I wonder what the Roman salute is another name for. And wouldn't you know it, I'm perfectly placed to debunk this ridiculous argument along with all the other ones, because I am standing right here in the city where the Roman salute made its way from anachronistic depictions of ancient Roman art to being the greeting of choice by fascists. This is Rijeka in northwest Croatia, or as the fascists would have you call it, that is, by its Italian name, Fiume. I am in Rijeka in Croatia, or as the nuncio would have you believe it to be called, Fiume. This city is the birthplace of, among other things, the torpedo, so that's okay, and the Roman salute, the idea of black shirts, the balcony address, and basically all of the aesthetics of fascism were invented here by Gabriele D'Annunzio during his little proto-fascist experiment, and later basically plagiarized by Mussolini, and then plagiarized again by Adolf Hitler, who then added a sprinkle of Germanness and the myth of multiple thousand years of history for a country that had been around for about 200. And wouldn't you know it, not only was the person who invaded this city and tried to create the world's first fascist state here the one that popularized the Roman salute as a greeting among fascists, but he's also partially responsible for the myths around it, that being that it was a greeting used in ancient Rome. There is no historical evidence for this. The first use of this greeting and the continued use of this greeting are one and the same. The Roman salute is the Sieg Heil. It is a salute designed to be used by fascists to signal to other fascists that they're fascists. And with that in mind, what could this possibly be? Nazi salute equals raising right arm at an... Aside from the context bros and the people just plainly in denial here, I've been reflecting on this over the past day or so. Historian of fascism, I purposely kept the part which showed Elon saying "my heart goes out to you," which is what Elon was expressing. Here's the full clip. They still don't get why they lost. Classic media spin. They conveniently omit context to fit their narrative. Here's the truth in full view. Elon's empathy was clear. Maybe if they focused on facts, they'd understand the real story. Yawning emoji. In all seriousness, you're arsler beyond belief if you think Elon Musk did a Nazi salute here. It's clear he's gesturing from the heart, deeply moved by emotion and gratitude. He literally says, "Thank you. My heart goes out to you." These next few were in response to an actual historian of fascism, confirming that it is a Nazi salute. And as you can imagine, the fact that they had to argue with an actual expert did not make the context bros any more normal. Case in point. "My heart goes out to you," clutches heart and gestures fling it to the crowd. "Historian, it's a fascist salute. Historian should understand the importance of getting the context right. This is clearly not meant to be the Nazi salute." "It was literally a gesture of my heart goes out to you. Historian of fascism, eye roll emoji. Get a real job." If you watch the video, he was thanking the crowd with all his heart and throwing his heart out to them. "He's throwing out love. That's it. End of story." When Elon placed his hand over his heart and extended his arm and hand as if throwing his heart to the crowd, it can be metaphorically described as him figuratively tossing his passion and dedication out to the audience with the people, of Elon expressing a sense of unity.
This video
was created by AI. With AI, you can create any character you want.
Real life, fantasy, sci-fi.
Yeah, me too. And surprise, surprise, it didn't make me a fucking bro I'm talking to for a second. With your palm, your hand doing. There are liberals on Twitter under tears because they'll have to reckon with what's astounding to me. In fact, I'm going to left, who can't is just astounding to me. A liberal on here. I've been centre-right who are at me. It's terrifying that it's easier to lash out at the messenger than to confront the reality. If they accept this, it meant that the political is so more invested so much of their reality. If they accept this, it meant that the political home they've invested so much of their identity in, the movement they've championed for years, has become something so morally repugnant that accepting it feels like breaking their own brain. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming. And I think that's exactly it. It's the same thinking that leads people into conspiracy theories. Sometimes it's easier to believe something completely batshit than accept a horrifying truth. Some people find it easier to believe 9/11 happened because George Bush wanted an excuse to invade Iraq, rather than reckon with the horror of American imperialism and the hatred it's brought out in many across the world, especially when they grew up believing that America was the land of the free, and that everyone in the world wanted to be an American. Sometimes the truth hurts so much, and is so fundamentally incompatible with a person's worldview that they would much sooner believe that the earth is flat than believe in the reality happening right in front of them in plain view. Now, aside from the context bros and the people just plainly in denial, there are quite a few people online who, read the Wikipedia, the ultimate Elon Musk, namely, a favourite argument, it's a Roman salute. I've read 3 Wikipedia old, and I've never Cecius Maximus different ways. It's a Roman salute. Out of the salute equals. What would you say, however? Upward angle, palm facing downward. Nazi salute. What would you say, however, if I were to tell you that the Roman salute proof that the Romans Nazi salute, and that either you that the downwards? What would you say, however, if I were to tell you that the Roman salute is the Nazi salute, and that either way we don't? It was him, Italian poet, prolific, and the man who invaded my city, or bourgeois handshake. Its limits seem to, including the militia, the Roman salute, and even the meaningless war cry. From all over Italy, they swaggered around in cloaks and daggers, literally, bullied the local citizens, and enjoyed themselves immensely. The regime was a permanent fiesta, full of processions and ceremonies, of dancing and slogans. D'Annunzio's idea of democratic decision-making was rather like Mussolini's later. Long rhetorical speeches from balconies to the eager crowds below, punctuated by massive acclamations. D'Annunzio also invented many of the other trappings of the later fascist regime, including the militia, the Roman salute, and even the meaningless war cry. However, D'Annunzio's Fiume was not just comic opera. The Comandante issued proclamations urbi et orbi. Closely connected to D'Annunzio's custom of regularly appearing before the people is his introduction of the raised arm salute into his political and military protocol. In imitation of the epic early films, not least Cabiria, D'Annunzio had to fight for. People, as toddlers, I'm sure they're very concerned about Trump. I'm grateful for it. And then you have the newspaper headline, fascism is here, even as people are literally Sieg-heiling behind the presidential seal. Excuses to look away from what is blindingly obvious to everyone with more smarts than a single-celled organism that this is a Nazi salute. To everyone with more smarts than a single-celled organism that this is a Nazi salute. A Sieg more smarts than a single-celled organism that this is a Nazi salute. A Sieg Heil, a Roman salute, no was for them. Praying on characters in has a right to. Because now the protesters are in hot water, with the public prosecutor's office investigating them in suspicion of using unconstitutional symbols. So it's okay for Musk, but not for everyone else. If you deem the symbol to be hate speech, which it is, then you have to admit that Musk did said hate speech. Or I could take a bit of time to not talk, so inevitably I'm going to have to talk a lot. And I've also got a video coming out this year, but I'll try and break it up with some... May have gone down, but I'm now at the... You want to learn Italian? Nathan Lane. And also in for you. Sun may have gone down, but I'm now at... Jokes. Okay. A lot of heavy stuff this year about this. So in the things... Little chew... perks. My Nintendo Switch friend code. After he agreed with he's doing a timeline, I pause and record European every of denial. But you're saying that there are. How did accepting that there are Nazis out in the.
Don't compromise quality insurance for savings or your time for this ad. Hit that skip button.
Or, in the case of those less far right, accepting that there are Nazis out in the open, that it is your moral duty to stop at any cost. How did the war go for your master race? Fled to a bunker and shot in the face. Strung upside down in the public square. Guess you want to end up there. Follow your leader, Nazi scum. One of us must die, I promise I won't be the one. Hey, this was a long one. This took a while.
Make that determination, but he's in the protocol and could be listed as questionable as we sit here today. And I'd imagine we got some other guys that lack availability associated with bumps and bruises, associated with play this time of year that could be limited at the top part of the week. But we expect those guys to pick up as the week goes on, and you can characterize Aaron Rodgers within that group as well. Now on to Baltimore. As I mentioned earlier, man, they're familiar with us. We're familiar with them. It creates excitement. It creates excitement around the strategic planning. It's fun to, to have knowledge of this group, but watch how they've evolved over the course of the journey. And we all evolve for a variety of reasons. The elevation of individual players, the emergence of individual players, the attrition component of the game as you miss people and adapt schematically, and from a divisional labor standpoint to make up for that, the return of players and that impact that it has. For instance, on offense, I'll start with Baltimore's offense. At the early portions of the year, they were without Richard and Likely, two major components, if you're familiar with Baltimore, that play major roles in how they function. Likely is an awesome second tight end to partner with Andrews. They play a lot out of two tight end personnel groups, and they're able to get a lot done in the running game and in the passing game. And I think you feel with each passing week the impact of his return and presence, and certainly the same thing with Richard, man. We've dealt with him over the years, man. You get that guy on the field in front of Derrick Henry, man, you got an all-day job ahead of you in terms of minimizing what they're capable of in the running game. And certainly, as we lean in on this week, that's where our attentions lie from a defensive perspective. No disrespect to their passing game, and certainly they got a lot of capable guys there. But we're talking about a legendary runner of this generation in Derrick Henry. We're talking about some schematics and some personnel that really highlight that agenda, coupled with our present state coming off the type of performance that we just came off of regarding the run. I believe that focus is justified and appropriate. But they do have some dangerous people on the perimeter. I like their division of labor from a receiver standpoint. Zay Flowers obviously is a dangerous receiver. He's good after the catch. He's got make you miss. He's elusive. Bateman and D are veteran guys that know what it is that they're doing. D-Hop, you can't say enough about him in terms of some 50-50 ball matchups and the things that he provides them from a one-on-one perspective. As I mentioned the tight ends when I was talking about the running game, Mark Andrews, man, him and Lamar have been, partners in this thing since they got drafted in the same draft class. I think he's Baltimore's all-time leading receiving touchdown guy. He's certainly still a major component of what they do in the red area. I think he's got 5 or so touchdowns this year. But the ball goes to and through Lamar. His ability to extend and make plays, his ability to run, particularly in situational moments, is and always has been a challenge. We failed some at that challenge a week ago against Josh Allen, and so for those reasons, man, we're really working with an edge in preparation for this one. Certainly we have a lot of experience in defending them and going against them, but I'm sure they say similar things regarding us. And so with that understanding, we proceed. On the defensive side of the ball, they really did some things to stabilize themselves kind of at the trade deadline. A couple quality acquisitions, one at the safety spot and one at the edge spot to round out some areas where they were really thin. The safety acquisition has really allowed Kyle Hamilton to do what Kyle Hamilton does, which is to play big nickel on first and second down and play around the line of scrimmage and blitz and defend the run and set edges. You get in sub-package situations and more passing circumstances on third down. He essentially plays a dime linebacker spot, and you have to deal with he and Roquan, and they're both formidable, certainly. They're very good underneath defenders and blitzers, and they've got really good schematics that highlight those talents. Another versatile guy, obviously worth mentioning, is Marlon Humphreys, man. He plays outside when Kyle Hamilton plays nickel. When Kyle Hamilton moves to dime linebacker, he plays inside. He's a very versatile guy, man. He's the poster boy for their turnover culture. I think he's got 17 career forced fumbles and counting now. And so ball security is going to be a major component of it. We got to be really fundamentally sound there. Again, he leads that charge. But again, wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention Malachi Starks, man, their first rounder. He's a center fielder, man, and is doing a really good job patrolling that area of the field, and particularly of late, as I mentioned, with that acquisition, and they're able to solidify some division of labor. He's been a mainstay in the middle of the field for him and doing a nice job of solidifying that space. You see growth and development in Nate Wiggins in year 2. I think he's playing really good football. He's a tough cover man. I know he went out of the last football game, but as we sit here and prepare today, we certainly anticipate seeing him in a matchup like this and ready to deal with his talents. They do a lot of things up front, man. They use a variety of packages and personnel groups. They've had some attrition up front in their defensive line and edge people, and so they get into some dime 41. They also get into some dime 32. Young draftee out of Clemson, Simpson, is versatile. You'll see him in some dime 32. He'll rush off the edge. He'll act as a hover rusher at times in a hybrid 4-man rush. He drops some. It gives him really good schematic variation. You got he and Roquan and Kyle Hamilton down around the box. Some guys blitz, some guys cover. They do a nice job week in and week out of kind of changing those things up. And then certainly when we play these guys, man, special teams is always a major component of how games unfold. They're a really good special teams unit. It's a value system of theirs. Certainly it's a value system of ours. We'll be fighting for every blade of grass in all 3 phases. And oftentimes they come in more chunks in this phase because of the vertical and horizontal grass associated with these plays. And so, man, we got to be really good in that space. Our return games got to provide a leg up for us. Our coverage game has got to be excellent, and certainly our specialists have to be on it. Excited about the prep in terms of what lies ahead with us this week. Excited about getting in front of our guys, starting tomorrow morning, man, and laying out a plan and working that plan and taking it to Baltimore, AFC North football with a division lead online. I'll pause and open up for questions.
Mike, when you talk about the frustration, where do you see it manifested? In their play, in their body language, in their behavior, what?
In a little bit of both, really, in all areas, and certainly, I never want people to apologize for caring. And I view the frustration displayed last week in that way. Guys were in fight mode. They care. The game wasn't unfolding the way that we desire. They didn't necessarily express it appropriately. And so as a leader, it's about redirecting that and making sure it's channeled in the right ways. But also, how do we move on from that? The source of that frustration is not playing the way that we would like to play. And so certainly putting together a good plan and putting them in position to play well is a component of moving on from it.
Mike, what did you learn from the captains in talking to them and what they feel like needs to change?
We have a lot of discussions week in and week out. I generally leave those discussions between us. But certainly I'm open to insight from those guys and assistance from those guys. A lot of those guys been around a lot of football. And, when you're in the position that I'm in, you don't care where good advice comes from. You don't care where good ideas come from. That's just the spirit in which I move and have moved for a very long time. I think the longer you're in this business, you understand that. Forget authorship or ownership. It's about being right and being ready. And so, man, certainly those opinions are valued.
Mike, you said after the game on Sunday that the answers were in the building, but a lot of the issues that you guys had on Sunday have been the issues all season. Why have the answers to those issues been so elusive? Because
those same ingredients have produced 6 wins as well as 6 losses. And so, it's about how we cook it this week.
One of the things that Aaron mentioned after the game was that he felt like practice wasn't good last week, and that's kind of been a common theme. Is there something that needs to change with practice, or is that feedback that he's given you that you can take into account?
I'm open to doing whatever it is that we need to do, obviously, in the effort to make practice better. Sometimes practice gets challenging, particularly at the early portions of the week this time of year, because of lack of significant player availability, and certainly felt that last week, not making that as an excuse. That's just the reality of our business. I'm sure people that we compete against miss significant players as well. How we navigate that oftentimes during the week is, an example of how we might navigate it during the course of the weekend. And certainly last week, based on the results, were not good enough. And particularly from a defensive perspective, when we lost Patrick Queen, we didn't do a good enough job of managing that component of it.
Also mentioned that he thought maybe the cold weather was impacting the quality of practice. Do you consider moving more practices inside?
You know, we generally play outside, and so if the surface is safe, I like to practice in the environment that we play in. But if you lose productivity because of the windage, et cetera, those are just general decisions that you make that's best appropriate for the group. In spirit, you like the group to practice in the environment that they play in, but if it's counterproductive, if it's survival, then certainly you make adaptation.
When you guys have the run fit problems that you guys had Sunday, and you're going up against another big run opponent, where's the line between focusing on the minutia and the smaller details versus maybe looking at a more global approach from a coaching standpoint, how to fix those problems?
I think you approach it from both perspectives. I think you got to put a lot of lines in the water. Certainly, we're looking at strategic global things from a strategy or schematic standpoint, but we're also looking at the division of labor and the positions that we put players in, how we adjust and adapt and communicate, particularly when that gets strained due to player availability or lack thereof. And so some of those things and all of those things are a component of the decision-making process.
Department's health in that regard. TJ Watt was pretty frustrated that they seemed to run the same play or similar concept over and over with success. Where were the shortcomings in that particular play or that situation?
It was really good execution by them. Oftentimes it was a final look, but there were pre-snap movement and changes of offensive personnel that disguised it. And so sometimes a play would hit in a particular space, but they would change offensive personnel, requiring us to change defensive personnel, and the person might be different the second time. And so that's just a strategic component of football. Man, they did an awesome job. I don't want to take anything away from them, and we certainly have to be better.
Aside from Harmon's health, which has been a variable, and you mentioned you're open, it will be again this week with his injury. Why have you found that the run game has been at times very good on defense against like Chicago and Jonathan Taylor, and why has it struggled as mightily as it has in other groups?
They both have designed quarterback runs as a component of their attack. Lamar is more on the perimeter because of his talents, his elusiveness, his speed. Josh Allen is more downhill because of his talents. He's big, he's strong, he's competitive and combative. But either way you slice it, it's 11-on-11 football. Certainly, they have different approaches to that 11-on-11 football. The differences in the backs have a lot to do with it. Cook is elusive and perimeter capable and things of that nature. And certainly, although Derek has great speed and when he gets into the secondary, he's a problem. You really want to work hard to minimize his downhill because, man, when he gets downhill on you, you really feel it. That's when he starts bumper carring and bouncing off of people, and you want to eliminate that component of his game. And so there certainly are some similarities, but there certainly are some dramatic differences as well. We'll lean on the similarities. We have experience competing against Baltimore, and so we certainly understand the differences.
Mike, the way Baltimore ran against you last year in December, did you learn anything what not to do to try to defend that?
Certainly.
Such as?
Just how you play apex players, the guys that are halfway between the core of the defense and the perimeter, some of the things you do around secondary rotation and so forth. I think anytime you play, there's an educational process. I think one of the first things that we do on Monday morning or Sunday night, most of the time for me is Sunday, is jot down some just quick initial notes while it's fresh to capture that learning, the adaptation that happens in game, the adjustments, the conversations had formally and informally. I think it's just good business and protocol to formally document that, to collect it and store it, because certainly if you've been in this business any length of time, you double back to it sooner, probably more so than later.
When you're having trouble generating knowledge,
we got a bunch of guys that are capable. I think we've been through some of these discussions before. We got a lot of capable guys that we have a lot of confidence in. Pat is certainly one of them. Ball didn't bounce his way a week ago, but certainly he's a viable option for us and one that's strongly considered as we work.
Bills team that largely struggled against the run.
We got to roll our sleeves up and go back to work, man. Our process for us is a thing for me. Oftentimes I get asked, I think, Brooke, you always ask, what gives you confidence, and sometimes I answer it in a colorful way, but it's what we do. It's no different than what you guys do. You guys might write a bad article or a couple of bad articles. Does it lessen your confidence in your ability to write articles the next time? I imagine it doesn't, because you've been doing it all your adult lives. And it's the same for us as individuals or a collective in this business. Certainly our last performance wasn't up to snuff, but I don't know that it lessens our belief in self or our ability to deliver individually and collectively moving forward.
At the same time, though, does it force you to reevaluate the way you go about your job? And you
Does it make you when you write a bad article?
More confidence in you, which is
Certainly it does, because if you got a desire to be great, you better analyze things in a really critical way. You know what I mean? And I think that's what you're asking. And certainly, if winning is our agenda, and it is, we're not going to be hypersensitive to that.
But when you have a stretch where you guys have not played really consistent football for going on 2 months, do you accentuate the bad, or do you say, when I asked you earlier about sort of where you're at, you said, well, these answers also produced 6 wins. So do you have to remind these guys, hey, we played good football?
I think it depends on the situation, what topic is being discussed and who you're dealing with. I think at times you utilize both.
So how do you channel that confidence, Mike? Is it more about we are confident that we can come up with different ways to, as you often say, skin the cat, or is it more about confidence that we just need to do what we do better?
It's both. It's both. I think that, I think if you're in one lane exclusively, you're not providing enough irons in the fire to produce victory.
How much have you changed your approach during the season this year?
As compared to what?
As compared to what you normally do. When you say, when we write bad articles, what do we do? Well, sometimes I, transcribe differently.
I think the tools that available oftentimes dictate the change, and so certainly this week's plan is going to be different than last week's plan. The opponent is different. The players available to us, anticipated available to us, may be different, and so that's what I mean when I ask, how do you change? Because you change because of necessity. You change because of the challenges are different week in and week out. The materials available to you, whether it's manpower or what have you, change based on player availability and so forth. Conditions change. The environmental component of the game changes. Certainly we're going to be in Baltimore, Maryland, and so that creates a hostile environmental possession downs for our offense, for example. And so you change out of necessity. You're not resistant to change, and I don't know that you spend a lot of time quantifying the amount of that change. You just know that change is required.
Do you have an identity as a team yet?
Yeah, it's 6-6, and I don't like it.
Mike, you talk openly about building your team in the offseason to deal with the AFC North a lot of times. How did what happened at the end of last season in Baltimore impact the way you went about constructing this team this year?
The acquisition of bigs, you saw our emphasis in the draft around big people, fortifying our depth in that area, and certainly it's been required. We've certainly had some attrition in that area. Dean Lowry, Loudermilk, and Derek Harmon has missed a couple of stretches, and so that depth with young people like YA and O and others, man, is significant. You can't run out of bigs. If you run out of bigs in AFC North ball, you're running on the beach, certainly.
Mike, going back to identity, what have you identified on offense and defense as things that you guys do well that you can rely on when things are going off the rails?
I'm sorry?
What have you identified on offense that you, as a team, do well that you can fall back on, that you can rely on?
We're very good at third and manageable. I think we might be tops in the league at 3rd and 3 or less. I don't check some of those statistics. I generally focus on the things that we need to improve upon. But we've been really good at 3rd and manageable, and so if we work to stay in those down and distances, we give ourselves a chance to possess the ball more than we have, as an example. Defensively, we certainly have done a nice job in general at taking the ball away. Culturally, we know what a big component of the game that is, and so what can we do to fortify that component of our game again this week to make sure it's an aspect of our portfolio as we work to engineer victory, just to name a few. But again, when you're trying to be great, when you're trying to win games this week, you better be focused on things that you need to fix first and foremost, and not seeking comfort relative to the things that you do well or you've done well.
Slay was a healthy scratch on Sunday. Does he have an opportunity to earn his way back on the field, or what went into that decision?
You know, really it was less about Slay and it was more about getting an opportunity to see Asante Samuels. He's a global NFL starter type who's been on our practice squad. This time of year as attrition sets in, you step into stadiums week in and week out, things happen, and we certainly wanted to have an opportunity to see him in stadium before we maybe had to make a decision on him, before someone else forced our hand regarding decisions. And so it was about that for us. Slay has missed some time due to a variety of injuries and so forth, and it was about getting a look at that guy that started a lot of games in this league, and we did, and we liked some of the things that we saw. And
did you learn anything what not to do to try to defend that?
Certainly.
Such as?
You know, just how you play apex players, the guys that are halfway between the core of the defense and the perimeter, some of the things you do around secondary rotation and so forth. I think anytime you play, there's an educational process. I think one of the first things that we do on Monday morning or Sunday night, most of the time for me is Sunday, is jot down some just quick initial notes while it's fresh to capture that learning, the adaptation that happens in game, the adjustments, the conversations had formally and informally. I think it's just good business and protocol to formally document that, to collect it and store it, because certainly if you've been in this business any length of time, you know you double back to it sooner, probably more so than later.
When you're having trouble generating offense, you know, why does it make sense to have Pat Freiermuth on the bench?
You know, we got a bunch of guys that are capable. I think we've been through some of these discussions before. We got a lot of capable guys that we have a lot of confidence in. Pat is certainly one of them. Ball didn't bounce his way a week ago, but certainly he's a viable option for us and one that's strongly considered as we work this week.
Mike, you talk a lot about frustration, and you have said you understand the fans' frustration. What is it like for you personally when they're calling for you to go?
You know, in general, I agree with them. From this perspective, football is our game. We're in the sport entertainment business. And so if you root for the Steelers, entertaining them is winning. And so when you're not winning, it's not entertaining. And if you've been in this business, you understand that. And so I respect it. I share frustrations. I understand what makes this thing go, and winning is what makes this thing go.
Mike, will you make any adjustments to the responsibilities of your coaching staff?
Not anything that merits discussion in this setting, no.
Mike, during the draft and free agency, you talked about wanting to be more physical across the board. How do you feel like your team is kind of fulfilling or not fulfilling that goal?
You know, as we stand here today, based on the last performance, not so good. But certainly at different times in this journey, I felt really good about it. And so I think that could describe a lot of the conversations, as I mentioned earlier, when you're sitting at 6-6. For us, it's about absorbing that and understanding that and plotting a course to move forward, but also understanding that the things that happen to us are not vacuum related. It's happening to those that we compete against as well. I'd imagine Baltimore's got similar challenges and issues because they sit at 6-6 as well. And so the team that can manage those things and summons up the good in a more really consistent way is a team that's going to have a chance to control this game this weekend.
Two things about Aaron. Just first of all, simply, how did his wrist come out of that game? How did he respond to playing a full game? And then secondly, did you see anything during the game that was cause for alarm that you need to see get better in practice in terms of the ball handling duties, things like that, before you feel better about what you can do offensively this week?
You know, I feel good about what we can do offensively. I don't think that we're limited in any way. Certainly we're going to do some things a little bit different to accommodate present circumstances. Like we worked almost exclusively out of gun or pistol a week ago to minimize some of that. It'll probably be less of a discussion this week. We'll see as the week wears on. And certainly I think he came out of the game, at least physically, from a wrist injury perspective in a good place.
Coach, you mentioned frustrations. I want to talk about the players' perspective. Would you prefer them flush those frustrations and that kind of passion here and get back to practice and just move on, or carry that and use that as a tool throughout the week?
Both.
Mike, where do you hang your hat as a coach when you look at the problems in the run offense game? You guys couldn't get that going against a Bills team that largely struggled against the run.
You know, we got to roll our sleeves up and go back to work, man. Our process for us is a thing for me. You know, oftentimes I get asked, I think, Brooke, you always ask, what gives you confidence? You know, and sometimes I answer it in a colorful way, but it's what we do. It's no different than what you guys do. You guys might write a bad article or a couple of bad articles. Does it lessen your confidence in your ability to write articles the next time? I imagine it doesn't, because you've been doing it all your adult lives. And it's the same for us as individuals or a collective in this business. Certainly our last performance wasn't up to snuff, but I don't know that it lessens our belief in self or our ability to deliver individually and collectively moving forward.
At the same time, though, does it force you to reevaluate the way you go about your job? And you
Does it make you when you write a bad article?
I got more confidence than you, which is
Certainly it does, because if you got a desire to be great, you better analyze things in a really critical way. You know what I mean? And I think that's what you're asking. And certainly, if winning is our agenda, and it is, we're not going to be hypersensitive to that.
But when you have a stretch where you guys have not played really consistent football for going on 2 months, do you accentuate the bad, or do you say, when I asked you earlier about sort of where you're at, you said, well, these answers also produced 6 wins. So do you have to remind these guys, hey, we played good football?
I think it depends on the situation, what topic is being discussed, and who you're dealing with. I think at times you utilize both.
So how do you channel that confidence, Mike? Is it more about we are confident that we can come up with different ways to, as you often say, skin the cat, or is it more about confidence that we just need to do what we do better?
It's both. It's both. I think that, I think if you're in one lane exclusively, you're not providing enough irons in the fire to produce victory.
How much have you changed your approach during the season this year?
As compared to what?
As compared to what you normally do. When you say, when we write bad articles, what do we do? Well, sometimes I, transcribe differently.
I think the tools that available oftentimes dictate the change, and so certainly this week's plan is going to be different than last week's plan. The opponent is different. The players available to us, anticipated available to us, may be different, and so that's what I mean when I ask, how do you change? Because you change because of necessity. You change because of the challenges are different week in and week out. The materials available to you, whether it's manpower or what have you, change based on player availability and so forth. Conditions change. The environmental component of the game changes. Certainly we're going to be in Baltimore, Maryland, and so that creates a hostile environment on possession downs for our offense, for example. And so you change out of necessity. You're not resistant to change, and I don't know that you spend a lot of time quantifying the amount of that change. You just know that change is required.
Do you have an identity as a team yet?
Yeah, 6-6, and I don't like it.
Mike, you talk openly about building your team in the offseason to deal with the AFC North a lot of times. How did what happened at the end of last season in Baltimore impact the way you went about constructing this team this year?
The acquisition of bigs. You saw our emphasis in the draft around big people, fortifying our depth in that area, and certainly it's been required. We've certainly had some attrition in that area. Dean Lowry, Loudermilk, and Derek Harmon has missed a couple of stretches, and so that depth with young people like YA and O and others, man, is significant. You can't run out of bigs. If you run out of bigs in AFC North ball, you're running on the beach, certainly.
Mike, going back to identity, what have you identified on offense and defense as things that you guys do well that you can rely on when things are going off the rails?
I'm sorry?
What have you identified on offense that you, as a team, do well that you can fall back on, that you can rely on?
We're very good at third and manageable. I think we might be tops in the league at 3rd and 3 or less. I don't check some of those statistics. I generally focus on the things that we need to improve upon. But we've been really good at 3rd and manageable, and so if we work to stay in those down in distances, we give ourselves a chance to possess the ball more than we have, as an example. Defensively, we certainly have done a nice job in general at taking the ball away. Culturally, we know what a big component of the game that is, and so what can we do to fortify that component of our game again this week, to make sure it's an aspect of our portfolio as we work to engineer victory, just to name a few. But again, like, you know, when you're trying to be great, when you're trying to win games this week, you better be focused on things that you need to fix first and foremost, and not seeking comfort relative to the things that you do well or you've done well.
Slay was a healthy scratch on Sunday. Does he have an opportunity to earn his way back on the field, or what went into that decision?
I would certainly suggest it.
Week to week, I don't know that I have out, and so
the stadium in a way that to lean into that a little bit.
You know, I don't think faced with it.
Missy Matthews.
Anyone else?
And for negativity in the ways that you ask.
Anyone else? All right.
Appreciate it.
All right, that's Mike Tomlin's press conference. Welcome in Missy Matthews and
thriller of her own, and I want to walk you through all of this because I hate to break it to Candace, but she seems to be living in a paranoid, manufactured reality in which multiple governments are trying to assassinate her at all times. She has strung together a massive international conspiracy theory that she is at the center of, and she has been live tweeting through all of this. She believes all of this is real, according to sources. She is genuinely convinced, and you have to keep in mind she has one of the largest internet audiences right now. Now, this isn't to necessarily denigrate Candace Owens. I've actually heard some of my fans that watch this show say they also watch Candace, but it's to cast not only doubt, but you guys just got to read some of this shit. So let's start off here. She said today, this was today, quote, "I can now say with full confidence that I believe Charlie Kirk was betrayed by the leadership of Turning Point USA and the very people who eulogized him on stage." So we essentially have here a massive conspiracy theory surrounding Charlie Kirk, but it's bigger than that. There are multiple storylines running in this James Bond movie at the same time, and let me walk you back to perhaps one of the most interesting. Candace Owens tweeted a month or two back. She said, quote, "2 days ago, I was contacted by a high-ranking employee of the French government. After determining this person's position in proximity to the French couple, I have deemed the information they gave me to be credible enough to share publicly in the event that something happens. In short, this person claims that the Macrons have executed upon and paid for my assassination." She's saying that the president of France and his wife are targeting her in an assassination attempt, and she's the one that found out through like some tip in the email. Just for some context, Candace Owens has been floating conspiracy theories that Bridget Macron is transgender and was born a man. Completely baseless, completely false. The Macron family launched a lawsuit for defamation saying, hey, you got to stop making like hundreds of videos and posts about us actually being transgender. It's weird.
It's now code red in the markets and in tech bro land as the money seems to be drying up and the competition keeps getting stronger and stronger. So look at this. OpenAI's Altman declares code red to improve ChatGPT as Google threatens AI lead. Basically, it's been reported last week that Google's got this new chatbot thing called Gemini 3. It comes out to be pretty good and may even be better than ChatGPT. I'll let you guys, you can write in the comments if you think it is better. I just saw a lot of reports saying, hey, the thing's pretty good. And that's really worrisome for OpenAI because I'll just tell you guys, they are not profitable. They're just burning massive amounts of cash. And you got like a big player like Google coming in and Google's loaded, this. They got money, they got coders, they got engineers. They've been in this game a long time. And OpenAI and ChatGPT is a direct challenge to Google. I think OpenAI and a couple of these companies have also released browsers recently, which is another challenge to Google. And I mean, do you think Google's going to sit around and say, oh, okay, fine, you can just take away our business. We don't need no search engines or anything like that. We'll just all use your chat. But no, of course they're going to fight back, right? Of course they're going to fight back. And so this is going to be essentially a spending war. And for OpenAI's perspective, man, they may be running out of cash because they got to keep raising money. They're constantly raising money. On top of that, and this is why it's code red, you got a big bet against Tesla now. Big short investor Michael Burry revives his short bet against Tesla, calling the stock ridiculously overvalued, which of course is. I tell you guys this stuff all the time. Sometimes people always ask, so why does the Tesla stock go up? And I'll just say this, markets can be irrational, right? It happens. Like it's hard to time the exact top. It's hard to time the exact bottom. Markets be crazy sometimes, but when you see like all these patterns happen at the same time, it just really feels toppy. And look at this. This is from Michael Burry. Listen to what he says about Tesla and think about what it means for OpenAI, because it's very similar. This is what he says. The Elon cult was all in on electric cars until competition showed up. Okay. Then all in on autonomous driving until competition showed up. And now is all in on robots until, you guessed it, right? Until competition shows up. And that's pretty similar to ChatGPT. They were the only game in town, right? People say, well, that's their opportunity there. And you start to get more and more players in the game. And I wouldn't bet against Google. It's one company I just wouldn't bet against. And you got OpenAI trying to, threaten their business. The Tesla situation is kind of a joke because basically Elon, he may be a first mover in some industries, sometimes not first mover. Sometimes he's like trying to spend to catch up. Like, for example, Elon's got his own little chat body thing, but I think it's way down compared to the other major players, and that's his Grok thing. Regards to, say, electric cars, there's a lot of competition here. I live here in Korea. There's a lot of Korean models that you probably don't see in USA, but they're slowly going to be coming there because I know I can see what's available in USA. I can see what's available here, and it's different. And then you have the Chinese brands, which are doing very, very well overseas, particularly BYD has been a big hit. I mean, it's just a lot of competition. Autonomous, if for Elon, he wants to do the robotaxi stuff. I think in the USA, I think the leader is Waymo, so it's not Tesla at all. And then regarding the robots, I would say clearly Boston Dynamics, a leader in the USA. And then you got a bunch of companies in China that will probably come in cheaper. It's just that they're able to manufacture stuff cheaper. It's a thing. Now, obviously there's always a balance between cost and then, quality, but in China, what if you can do both? And then don't sleep on here in Korea. I'm telling you guys. And if you don't know, Hyundai actually acquired Boston Dynamics. So it's like a joint partnership there. I just think Tesla's in a world of hurt, and you got the CEO over there who's just like Looney Tunes. And I'll just say this. I don't usually mention someone's appearance because it's not really appropriate. But in this particular situation, I'll just mention Elon didn't look so healthy in his last interview, and he's really picked up a lot of weight. And I think that's a fair thing to say. Just for the richest dude in the world, he doesn't look great. And we also know that he's an addict too. So, and he was begging for his $1 trillion pay package thing. I think there's real problems over at Tesla. I think Michael Burry can smell it out, and he's calling it out, and he's putting his money where his mouth is. There's another thing too that I wanted to mention with the Tesla thing that was fascinating. This is what it says. It says, Burry said Tesla dilutes its shareholders at an estimated rate of 3.6% per year to stock-based compensation it awards its employees without buybacks to offset the impact. CEO Musk's gargantuan compensation would make matters worse. So basically, if you're a shareholder in Tesla, the way that they do, the stock compensation for their employees and the way that they structure Musk's pay package, it basically screws you. It's an easy way to put it. And the company doesn't really have much new stuff coming out, if any, and they're already behind the competition. So it's a loser. Tesla's basically a stock pumping company. That's basically all it is at this point. And then you also have this is all related. Crypto bubble appears to be popping. Look at this. Some people have lost really a lot. Crypto's retail traders hit hard as strategy ETFs plunge 80%. And I think what it was is you had people who were doing like leverage kind of funds. So there's some of these, it's like MSTX, MSTU, MSTP, whatever these things are. They've dropped 80%. And then you had Michael Saylor. He had this crazy company where he put a bunch of money into Bitcoin, I think is what it was. What is it? Down 60% from the high. And I see it every day to where, some of these people are in Delulu land saying it's going to be the future, but I'm not seeing it because you have a problem with, be it your crypto mining stuff that say Eric Trump promotes or your data centers. It needs a lot of power. And where are you going to get said power, right? And then you got to keep building these data centers to keep up with all the demand. And I think we're going to run out of money eventually, which I'll show you because I think but I can see the consumer is strapped for cash, the best way to put it. Let me show you that actually. Now we're talking about the consumer situation. This was an interesting story. It says, Gen Z shoppers aren't spending like retails need them to. So basically, they need you to subscribe to all their AI services, and they need you to buy the Tesla cars or whatever. It's like people are like, and this is young people are like, I just don't have any money. I'm cutting back. Now let me show you. This is interesting. This is average expected holiday spending by generation. And I want to hear from you if these numbers sound similar to yours in your neck of the woods. Everyone's going to be different. But we're comparing last year to this year. And remember, this stuff matters because if you're OpenAI, if you're Google or whatever service, or if you're Tesla, you have to convince people to buy your stuff. And people who, may want to buy your stuff, but they may not necessarily have enough money to do said thing. Like people have limited amount of resources. And then the other thing that's so ridiculous about this whole, economic system that Elon Musk wants, or whatever, the Altmans, is that they want AI and robots to replace all of you. So if we're all replaced, how are we going to buy your products? So already though, among most generations here, people are cutting back. So Gen Z in particular, though, looks like they're cutting back the most.
And when you look at what he's done with Somalia, which is barely a country, they have no anything. They just run around killing each other. There's no structure. And when I see somebody like Ilhan Omar, who I don't know at all, but I always watch her for years. I've watched her complain about our Constitution, how she's being treated badly. Our Constitution, the United States of America, is a bad place. Hates everybody, hates Jewish people, hates everybody. And I think she's an incompetent person. She's a real terrible person. But when I watch what is happening in Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes, or however many lakes they have, they got a lot of lakes, but this beautiful place, and I see these people ripping it off. And now I'm understanding, and you're going to look at that, Scott. I hear they ripped off Somalians, ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too. I can say it about other countries, too. We don't want them to hell. We have to rebuild our country. Our country's at a tipping point. We could go bad. We're at a tipping point. I don't know if people mind me saying that, but I'm saying it. We could go one way or the other, and we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain. And from where they came from, they got nothing. They came from paradise, and they said, this isn't paradise. But when they come from hell, and they complain and do nothing but bitch, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Mr. President, has Maduro offered to leave? Yes.
All right. Looks like this is the conclusion of the cabinet meeting lasting well over an hour, I think about 2 hours now. Donald Trump in the cabinet room with all of his cabinet secretaries, answering a whole lot of questions there at the end, including many about those Venezuelan boat strikes, including the one where there was a second strike where survivors were killed. That story has been dominating the news over the past few days. And it's a story that the White House has been trying to get its story straight on over the past few days as well. First, the administration said the second strike never happened. That was part of the explanation. Then they said it did happen, adding the strikes were always intended to be lethal. But that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, never directly ordered the second strike and never said to, quote, kill everybody, as the Washington Post had reported. Now they're laying the responsibility for the second strike on Admiral Mitch Bradley, who they call an American hero. At the same time, Secretary Hegseth, as you have been listening to over this past few hours, he's still working to justify the actions. Here's another portion of one of the answers about the strikes just a moment ago during the cabinet meeting.
I'll say again, we've only just begun striking narco boats and putting narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean because they've been poisoning the American people. And Joe Biden tried to approach it with kid gloves and allowed them to come across the border. Cartels take over community, 20 million people, hundreds of thousands of Americans poisoned. And President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off. We're taking the fight to these designated terror organizations, and it's exactly what we're doing. So we're stopping the drugs, we're striking the boats, we're defeating narco terrorists, and we're standing.
And you may say one thing, that drugs coming in through the sea by sea are down 91%. And I don't know who the 9% is.
I'm not sure either, sir.
But down 91% by sea.
We've had a bit of a pause because it's hard to find boats to strike right now, which is the entire point, right? Deterrence has to matter, not arrest and hand over and then do it again, the rinse and repeat approach of previous administrations. This is meant to get after that approach. And I will just end by saying, as President Trump always has our back, we always have the back of our commanders who are making decisions in difficult situations, and we do in this case and all these strikes. They're making judgment calls and ensuring that they defend the American people. They've done the right things. We'll keep doing that, and we have their backs, Mr. President.
Take a look at the stagecraft there, the setting. Hegseth sitting right next to the president. It tells you a lot, including what the president seems to think about the chatter that Pete Hegseth is causing unnecessary headaches for the administration, which the Washington Post reports he is. As Pentagon officials tell the Post, they are alarmed by the administration appearing to scapegoat Admiral Bradley. From one of them talking to the Post, this is Protect Pete BS. And from another, it's throwing us, these service members, under the bus. It's also not going over well in Congress, as two congressional committees are demanding answers from the Pentagon, including potentially the audio logs of that September strike itself, which should include Hegseth, since he told Fox News the day after it happened that he was there.
I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
So Congress is still waiting on the evidence that shows that they were narco-terrorists, as the defense secretary has been alleging. They're also waiting for more information on that second strike. Hegseth is now saying, just said a moment ago in that cabinet meeting, that he never saw the second strike. He was there for the first one, as he told Fox News, but he says he never saw the second one. And he added that Admiral Bradley, in his words, quote, made the right call. Joining us, MS Now's congressional reporter Michael Schnell and MS Now's senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard. So, Vaughn, the administration is, I don't want to say they're in lockstep, but they are aligned. The president and Pete Hegseth are aligned in trying to justify what happened that day, no matter what.
Right. I think we have to take a step back here and just look at the totality of those remarks, as you just did, Katie. And that is the fact that the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, sitting next to the Secretary of Defense, the head of the Pentagon, they're effectively stood by as his Secretary of Defense said that they are not going to treat these narco-terrorists, as he calls them, the alleged drug boats, as anything other than they would al-Qaeda or members of ISIS, and suggesting that they are not going to pat them on the head is the way that Hegseth described it, but instead they are going to use kinetic, lethal means to kill them. And the President of the United States sat there in solidarity and said that he defended the decisions that were being made by Pete Hegseth, as well as the Admiral who was overseeing this mission here. And going even a step further than that, when we're looking at, beyond these 21 strikes, including the strikes that are on September 2nd, but the President of the United States explicitly suggesting that he is prepared and planning to move forward with strikes that are not just on water and international seas, but also on land. He did not go into specifics about what exactly that looks like. When Pete Hegseth was asked specifically about those September 2nd strikes, though, he suggested that he was there, in fact, listening live and watching that first strike. But then he went to other meetings at the Pentagon when the decision was made an hour, 2 hours later to move forward with that second strike. He did not explicitly say the extent to which he was aware of the second strike and whether those two individuals who the Washington Post reports as having been killed in that second strike were in fact targets, or was the ship in the drug on board, allegedly on board, were those the targets of this here? And I think one other point here, as I try to roll back through my notes here, Katie, is the fact there when you look at Pete Hegseth here, he made the very specific comment about Admiral Bradley, who is overseeing that mission, saying Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He made the right call. We have his back. So this then goes to Admiral Bradley in the question about whether he was in fact commanded to kill everybody on board and whether he was executing orders from not just the top of the Pentagon, but also the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, because President Trump did not sidestep the attack and the impact of those two strikes and the killing of those 11 individuals who were on board it. He only went as far as to go even further in suggesting that they will move beyond just international waters to move forward with these attacks, but they will also start moving forward with targeting drug runners on land. Katie.
Vaughn, thank you so much. We're going to have Congressman Jim Himes, the ranking member of House Intel, on in just a moment. But, Michael, first I want to get a broader look at Congress from you. Lawmakers are back from the Thanksgiving break. How many of them are interested in these strikes?
Immense interest, Katie, on both sides of the aisle. As you mentioned, Congress returned back to session last night, House and Senate. It was their first time back since this bombshell report by the Washington Post. And a lot of lawmakers want answers. They want to find out what exactly happened during that September 2nd strike. And that's, of course, a large majority, if not all Democrats, but also a large handful of Republicans are curious and concerned about the reports of what happened. And they just want to get down to understanding what exactly occurred. So first and foremost, the chairman and ranking member of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees both said that they would be conducting oversight into those September 2nd strikes. I spoke to Congressman Adam Smith last night. He is the ranking member, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. He said that he is likely going to meet with Admiral Bradley on Thursday to discuss this strike. So really, lawmakers want answers, but the place and where we start to get difference in terms of reaction and response is whether or not folks think that Hegseth and Admiral Bradley or the Trump administration at large is liable for war crimes here. We know that is something that the Post had alleged in its story. We heard this morning from Speaker Mike Johnson, who really didn't show much concern with the strike, saying that under his understanding, the second strike was within the bounds of what the administration was trying to accomplish. But I also spoke last night to Senator Lisa Murkowski. She's the Republican from Alaska. She's, of course, no huge fan of the Trump administration, oftentimes does criticize him on things like this. I pressed her on if she thinks that the second strike was an example of a war crime. She wouldn't go there, but she came pretty close, saying that she doesn't think that an act of that nature would be aligned with the rules of war. Take a listen to both Speaker Johnson and Lisa Murkowski.
My assessment of this, my understanding is that most of the people that have looked at this, at least in a preliminary review, say that the admiral who ordered the second strike thought it was necessary to complete the mission. Secondary strikes are not unusual. It has to happen if a mission is going to be completed.
I think most would say that when you have two individuals that are literally floating in the water, a second order to kill them all is not something that we would consider within the rules of war.
So again, Katie, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, they want to conduct their oversight here to find out more information of what actually happened on September 2nd. But then when you start to get into the conversation of, well, should that second strike have even happened? Was it potentially a war crime? That's where you start to see this divide within the Republican Party that we expect to play out even more over the coming days as, again, Congress tries to glean more information about these strikes.
Well, not within the rules of war. Well, that would mean a war crime. You're just getting into a semantic argument there. Michael Schnell, thank you so much. Joining us, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He's the ranking member, as I said a moment ago, of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
I'm sure you got at least a little bit of that cabinet meeting. What do you make of the defense from the White House right now, which is that they believe that the strikes were within bounds? Admiral Bradley made the right call, and Pete Hegseth now saying he did not see the second strike.
Yeah, Katie, none of that matters. None of it matters. And I recognize the Trump, Hegseth, Speaker Johnson, soft shoe, because we've seen it over and over again. This is really simple, Katie. If you strike a combatant who is in distress, if you deliberately target someone, even if they're a combatant, even if they were doing very, very bad things, and they are not in a position to go after you, that is a war crime. Full stop. Deliberately targeting people, regardless of who they are, who are in distress, particularly on the high seas, is a war crime. Full stop. Secondly, and this is why you're going to hear a lot of nausea out of the Pentagon today, this thing of like, oh, Pete didn't know this, and the Admiral did this, and he's a great American. In the United States military, Katie, particularly in the United States Navy, there is a centuries-long tradition that when something goes wrong on the ship, it doesn't matter if it was an able-bodied seaman or whoever it was, the captain takes responsibility. In this case, of course, the president is trying to protect the Secretary of Defense. My own opinion is, based on the briefings that I've had, that in that particular strike, the Secretary of Defense had command authority. We'll find that out. We'll get these facts. But make no mistake, it doesn't matter if it was the Admiral or the Secretary of Defense. If that happened in the military, there's a long tradition of the captain taking responsibility. Thirdly, and we don't need to spend a lot more time on this, Katie, this whole thing of trying to say that we can take military action against people who for decades we have dealt with in a law enforcement context, that they are narco-terrorists. There is no such thing as a narco-terrorist. There are very, very bad narcotics people, cartels, etc., but they're desperate to make this look like it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda because that's the very thin line on which their illegal use of the United States military to take these people out resides. So, again, people shouldn't lose, amidst all of the smoke and mirrors here, the very simple fact that war crimes were in all likelihood committed and that the responsibility lies with the leadership.
You know, Fox News contributor, National Review legal analyst, lawyer Andrew McCarthy agrees with you on that. Says there's a lot of law written into the books about how to deal with drug traffickers, and there's a lot of law written into the books about how to deal with terrorists, and those two things are not the same. Drug traffickers are not considered terrorists under our legal system, so he disagrees with the strikes themselves, including him calling the second strike a war crime. But I want to get some insight from you because I think a lot of our viewers may not understand what happens behind the scenes at the Pentagon when a strike like this happens. Can you help us? And when you say Pete Hegseth was at the top of the command during this, what exactly does that mean? Are they in a room watching it happen? Is it like the Situation Room?
Yeah, and look, I wasn't there, and we will get those facts. But, you know, you can think of it the way that famous photograph where Barack Obama and his Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense are watching the raid on the Abbottabad compound that ultimately got Osama bin Laden. Probably, and again, I don't know because I wasn't there and because they haven't been particularly forthcoming in the answers to these questions, that is probably a little bit like what it looked like. This was the first strike. There were 11 people on it. This is a novel thing. By the way, every flag officer in that room knows that this is legally questionable. They know that Donald Trump and the Secretary of Defense fired the lawyers inside the Pentagon that might have raised an objection. So my guess is that people should think about it as those commanders, uniformed, and the Secretary of Defense, civilians, watching on a series of video screens, probably, by the way, with an audio feed, giving a readout on what the actual troops that are engaged are doing tactically in the moment. And they are seeing, and I can't tell you who's in the room, but they are seeing and hearing pretty much everything that is occurring. By the way, the Congress of the United States will get those audio tapes. We will get those videos, and we will remind the Pentagon that there is a centuries-long tradition of the leadership not being able to escape responsibility for the actions of the underlings. That's an essential element of our military.
Will you subpoena Admiral Bradley?
The Congress will want to talk to him. And by the way, I think the Congress will be talking to him very soon. We will also want to be talking to the Southcom commander, Admiral Halsey, who you will recall resigned or announced his resignation, I should say, in the days or weeks after this strike. My guess is that Admiral Halsey probably has some views on what he saw happen in that room that you asked about.
If Admiral Bradley was acting on his own, if he was not ordered to strike again, if Pete Hegseth did not give the kill everybody order, as he's claiming he did not, would that mean that Bradley committed a war crime and should be prosecuted?
Well, again, a lot depends on who was actually in command. Based on what I've heard, I think it might have been the Secretary of Defense, which is pretty unusual. But this was the first strike in a fairly exotic, if I may use a euphemism, military action. And so, the questions will be very specific, and it's not, I don't know whether Pete Hegseth said kill them all, but, in these sorts of operations, you either have great specificity on what the rules of engagement are, meaning, you take one shot. What happens if there are survivors? What happens if there's civilians in the area? If those rules weren't specific, again, and you don't need to hear it from me, a civilian. Ask anybody in the military. Ultimately, it is about these senior-most people. Again, in the United States Navy, when something goes on a boat, even if something goes wrong on a boat, even if the skipper doesn't know about it, the skipper does not get to escape accountability. There's a saying, you can delegate authority, but you cannot delegate responsibility. And what I'm seeing when I see that cabinet meeting is the President and the Secretary of Defense trying to delegate responsibility and accountability.
One more question on this. When other survivors, other folks have survived these strikes, we've repatriated them. I guess we've rescued them and repatriated them. If they are, as the administration alleges, narco-terrorists, if they were actually trafficking drugs, why would they not be bringing them to the United States to face legal action here? I mean, that's usually what happened to the Honduran president. We extradited him and we prosecuted him before the president pardoned him.
And then pardoned him. Yeah. So very, very good question. And there's a whole bunch of really important questions around that. Number one, why did they kill the first two guys and then they decided to rescue the second two guys, right? My guess is that there was a lot of discussion about what had just happened when they apparently deliberately killed two guys and that they changed their policy. We'll need to get those facts. But you're exactly right. Here we're being told, by the way, there is no such thing as a narco-terrorist, Katie, but we're being told that these people are just so horribly awful that they're responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans, that they create mayhem and violence and stuff. But what you learn when you consider the fact that two of them were repatriated to their own countries, we apparently, the United States of America apparently has enough evidence to kill these people, but we don't have enough evidence to try them in a court of law. People ought to sort of let that sink in and think about the implications of having enough evidence to kill somebody, but not to try them.
I want to ask you about Ukraine quickly. Steve Witkoff is going back to, or is in Moscow right now. He's going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin. He has not been to Ukraine. I'll make that note. Do you have a sense of what the motivation is for this peace deal? The Wall Street Journal just had a very big article saying make business or make money, not war, and laying out the ways in which American businessmen close to the White House could stand to benefit from the unfreezing of Russian assets, the bringing Russia back in from the cold.
Yeah, so the motives here are twofold, right? The president, as we all know, Peace Prize, and if he can bring peace to Ukraine, Russia, obviously that's a feather in his cap. But second, of course, is what you just talked about. And of course, look, everyone in the world knows this. The Saudis know this. The Gulf Arab states know this. If you really want to catch the president's attention, you talk to him in the language that he used before he got into public service, when he was a wheelin' dealin' real estate guy in New York City. You lay out what the business opportunities are. And the danger about that, of course, is that you see exactly what you saw in that 28-point plan, which is not a peace deal, but a surrender deal for Ukraine, because those business plans just seem so lucrative and so wonderful for you and your buddies and everybody else. But what gets lost here is the principle that the winner there is Vladimir Putin, because he gets to do a brutal, murderous invasion and actually win something for doing that, which is, of course, what the original 28-point plan proposal would have done for Vladimir Putin.
Congressman Jim Himes, ranking member of House Intel, thank you very much, as always, for joining us.
Thank you, Katie.
Coming up next, what has the president so interested in a special election in Tennessee in a district that he won by 22 points?
Today, I need to say something important. What I'm about to share with you might be the most significant information I've ever presented. The documents I've been reviewing for the past several months paint a picture so disturbing, so fundamentally threatening to our understanding of power in America that I honestly don't know if I'll be allowed to continue this work much longer. What if I told you the Jeffrey Epstein case isn't about one wealthy predator, but actually reveals a sophisticated intelligence operation that's been manipulating our political system for decades? While mainstream media has been endlessly recycling the same salacious details, the real story is far more disturbing, and it threatens the very foundations of our democracy. Let me explain what's really happening here. For those who have followed my investigative work, you know I've been digging into the Epstein case for years now. Recently, new documents have emerged that connect Epstein not just to the rich and powerful, but directly to intelligence agencies and political control systems that most Americans have no idea exist. To understand this properly, we need to go back to 2008, when then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta gave Epstein that infamous sweetheart deal. Most people don't realize that when questioned about this later, Acosta reportedly told Trump transition team members that he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Think about that for a moment. A federal prosecutor was explicitly told to back off because this predator was an intelligence asset. But that's just the beginning of this dark story. The first thing you need to understand is Epstein's connection to Ghislaine Maxwell. Her father, Robert Maxwell, wasn't just a media tycoon. He was widely reported to be a Mossad asset before his mysterious death in 1991. According to multiple intelligence sources I've interviewed, including former Israeli intelligence officer Ari Ben-Menashe, Robert Maxwell had been working for Israeli intelligence for years, assisting with operations ranging from arms deals to technology transfers. His death, officially ruled a suicide despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, came after he had threatened to expose certain operations. Within years of her father's death, Ghislaine became Epstein's partner. This isn't coincidence. My sources within intelligence communities have confirmed that Ghislaine was effectively continuing aspects of her father's work. The Maxwell family had deep connections not just to Israeli intelligence, but to other Western intelligence agencies as well, including the CIA and MI6. These weren't casual relationships, they were operational, but it gets worse. Epstein's primary financial patron, Leslie Wexner, gave him unprecedented power of attorney over his billion-dollar fortune in the 1,990 seconds. I've had financial experts review these arrangements, and they've universally called this arrangement baffling and unprecedented. Why would one of America's wealthiest retail moguls hand complete control of his finances to a man with no real financial credentials? The explanation that makes the most sense isn't financial at all. Wexner himself has interesting connections. Through the mega group, a loose coalition of Jewish American billionaires that Wexner co-founded, he maintained connections to numerous individuals with ties to both Israeli politics and intelligence operations. The mega group's original members included Charles Bronfman, whose family had historic ties to Meyer Lansky, and Edgar Bronfman Sr., who served as president of the World Jewish Congress. Other members included Ronald Lauder, who would later serve as president of the World Jewish Congress and maintain close relationships with numerous Israeli prime ministers. Here's where things get really interesting. Epstein's properties, particularly his New York mansion and Caribbean island, were equipped with extensive surveillance systems, cameras in every room. According to multiple witnesses I've interviewed, including former business associates and victims, these recordings weren't just for his personal collection, they were leverage. Blackmail material on some of the most powerful people in the world. I've verified through property records and architectural plans that Epstein's New York mansion had unusual modifications made specifically to accommodate extensive hidden recording equipment. Former employees have confirmed to me that there were regular maintenance visits by specialized technical teams that worked on systems that were off limits to regular staff. One former employee told me directly, "We all knew the place was wired. We were told never to discuss it." And that's not even the disturbing part. Through FOIA requests and cross-referencing visitor logs, I've confirmed that in December 2004, Epstein met with the CIA's Director of Central Intelligence. This meeting occurred at a private residence in Washington, D.C., not at CIA headquarters. Shortly after this meeting, the groundwork began for his extraordinary non-prosecution agreement that immunized any potential co-conspirators. This is absolutely unprecedented in federal cases involving sex trafficking. The question isn't whether Epstein was connected to intelligence. The evidence is overwhelming that he was. The question is, what was the operation actually for? Now watch how this connects. I've spent months analyzing Epstein's Black Book, which contained contact information for presidents, prime ministers, royalty, and CEOs of major technology companies and financial institutions. By cross-referencing these names with policy decisions, business deals, and intelligence operations over the past 3 decades, a disturbing pattern emerges. Many of these same individuals made decisions that shaped our national security apparatus, banking.
If you can't quit the P word, I want to let you know that Scripture tells us that successful men
Systems and technology platforms we use daily. For example, one tech CEO in Epstein's book later received massive government contracts for surveillance technology immediately after private meetings with Epstein. I've verified through SEC filings that companies connected to 3 different individuals in Epstein's inner circle received over $400 million in classified government contracts between 2002 and 2018. Let me walk you through some specific examples that demonstrate the scope of this operation. In 2008, a major Wall Street firm was on the brink of collapse during the financial crisis. The CEO of this firm appears dozens of times in Epstein's flight logs. Within 72 hours of a private meeting with Epstein, this same CEO received an unprecedented government bailout on terms far more favorable than other institutions. The timing isn't coincidental. Similarly, in 2014, a prominent political figure reversed their long-held position on a critical foreign policy issue immediately following a private meeting at Epstein's New York mansion. I've obtained visitor logs confirming this meeting, which was never disclosed publicly. 3 weeks later, this same political figure began receiving substantial donations from 3 different Epstein associates through a complex network of PACs and foundations. The pattern repeats with alarming regularity. Private meetings with Epstein, followed by inexplicable policy shifts, favorable regulatory decisions, or sudden financial windfalls. This wasn't just about sex and blackmail in the conventional sense. It was about building a sophisticated influence operation that could shape American policy at the highest levels. But perhaps most disturbing are Epstein's connections to the technology sector through his Edge Foundation and various private investment vehicles. Epstein cultivated relationships with leaders in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and surveillance systems. Several tech companies that received early funding through Epstein-connected investment groups now provide critical infrastructure for government surveillance programs. The implications are chilling. I've interviewed former intelligence officers who have confirmed that Epstein's operation bears all the hallmarks of what's called a honey trap, but one operating at an unprecedented scale and sophistication. One former intelligence official told me directly, "This wasn't rogue, this was sanctioned, and it's still ongoing, just with different figureheads." The documents I've recently obtained suggest that the operation didn't die with Epstein. The networks he built, the compromising material he gathered, and the influence systems he established have been inherited by others. Some of these individuals are known associates who have largely escaped scrutiny. Others operate even more in the shadows than Epstein did. What's particularly alarming is how this network intersects with emerging technologies of control. 3 companies with direct connections to Epstein associates now provide biometric identification systems used by government agencies. Two others are deeply involved in the development of central bank digital currencies, which would give unprecedented surveillance capabilities over all financial transactions. The implications of this are profound. It means many of the people making decisions about your privacy, your money, and your rights may be compromised.